Hi guys, Ashley here. Today I'm bringing you Elijah Whaley, who is the CMO of Parklu and the co-founder of one of China's biggest beauty bloggers, Maggie, who is big on not only Weibo but also Bilibili. Elijah, it's phenomenal to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
You are in Shanghai, and just before we started recording, you told me that this week everything feels totally back to normal. So how do you feel being in Shanghai right now on the beginning of April?
Yeah, well, I mean, to be honest, it feels like it's the safest place in the world to be as far as, the virus goes. And we've kind of almost 100% returned back to normal. Everybody's going back to the office. There were lines at our favorite restaurants and streets were packed over the weekend when the weather was nice. So it feels like Shanghai again. The only difference being is it feels just a little bit more like Beijing because everybody's wearing masks. And besides that, it really does feel like we are way past the hump and getting back to normal.
So you've lived through this COVID-19, the biggest outbreak, we hope, this far in China. What is your take on the whole situation? How do you think this COVID-19 outbreak will impact China, will impact the globe? I know that you have some interesting insights on that.
Sure. Yeah, I think that this could be a really, really strong marker and potentially something that we'll look at in history to kind of a little bit of a paradigm shift towards China taking over economically the world and brands really shifting and recognizing that this is going to be the place of growth. We already have projections in North America and Europe for negative GDP growth and fairly significant, 5% plus kind of GDP. And China will still be positive. They're looking at 2% or so positive GDP. And we've already seen, I had a really interesting conversation with Nike last weekend. And just over this period of time, they've been taking all of their overstock from around the world and flash selling it on live streams in China over this COVID-19 period. So consumerism has actually remained fairly strong in some ways, in some areas, especially with live streaming. And it is likely that China in some ways will look more like a service consumer society than it will manufacturing, as the consumption here is significant and it won't be as heavily impacted in the immediate future and potentially longer term future as the rest of the world is really, really being disrupted by this virus in a way that China wasn't because of how they dealt with it.
And right now, a lot of people are saying, okay, China has just released this, let's say, lockdown, and people are just getting out of their houses. And of course, they're purchasing. There's a little bit of this revenge consumption going, but at the same time, it's not at the level that everybody expected. It's definitely not SARS, because after SARS, everything bounced back rather quickly, and that revenge consumption really took over. Do you think that in general, consumer sentiment is strong, or do you think people are cautious? And if they're cautious, what products, what do you think basically about this whole consumption thing in China this far?
Yeah, I think there is probably an amount of caution, and it can probably be measured just the same as, we're still wearing masks, and some offices are still kind of on a rotation as far as people coming in. And, some of the DDs still have like plastic dividers between the drivers and the passengers. And so there's overall maybe a sense of that kind of cautiousness. However, I think that, and so maybe that is affecting consumption, but we have seen, I think, fairly good consumption in certain environments, especially when this live streaming thing has been very significant. And these live streamers have just a genius business model. It's great for everybody but the brands, in my opinion. And that has honestly been a great driver of, people still getting what they want and still spending a little bit.
You've mentioned live streaming. Tell me, what has changed? You work with a lot of bloggers, you work with a lot of brands. What has changed in the way bloggers and KOLs conduct themselves, do live streaming during this period? And do you think these changes are short-term, or are they going to be adopted long-term?
Yeah, I mean, it's, this is a e-commerce live streaming is something that in some ways it feels like a shiny new toy, in that it's been around for a while. When live streaming first started with bloggers, it was a gifting type of program. That's where the influencers were really making money. And then we saw Alibaba really recognize that, hey, this is something that's working.
Mm.
And I think back in 2018, they said, hey, this is where we're going to put a lot of investment into. We believe this is a form of future commerce, this retail entertainment, retailtainment kind of concept. And some of those really smart, clever bloggers picked up on this. And the model is very, very interesting. I mean, I just recently, if you don't mind, I'll tell just a little bit of story, because I think some people don't quite understand how e-commerce live streaming deals and campaigns work. So we actually got I saw a campaign for Austin Lee, the really, really big beauty influencer over here. And, he does these 8-hour, and for 5 minutes of one of his live streams, he was going to charge $20,000. And they were going to take a 300 renminbi product, and it had to be marked down to 60 renminbi. And then on top of that, he would get 30% of that 60 renminbi for all the products that he sold in commissions. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, this is not a ROI sale, really great opportunity. This is essentially what you're paying for is awareness marketing or some sort of customer acquisition at what you believe to be a low price. But the only way you're going to be able to make ROI on this is with really, really high retention. Now, that's only going to happen if the customers that are buying your very inexpensive products are the same kinds of customers that will buy it in the future. There's a significant risk there, whether, especially with higher end brands or products that are unknown, whether this will retain customers long-term, because that's essentially what you're betting on there. And, it's kind of a little bit classic. And I've seen this where brands have continued to kind of be abused in China in some ways, in that this is really, really wonderful for the platforms. They get great traffic. People are really sticky. They're staying on the apps. They're watching entertainment. They're buying more than they would. Lots of impulse buying. It's wonderful for the customers. It's the cheapest access to those products that they'll ever get from these brands. That's part of the deal with the KOLs, is it has to be the cheapest price offered anywhere on the internet. And often it's kind of the cheapest price they've ever offered. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of brands aren't selling hero products. They're creating new SKUs or doing some sort of special bundle or something like that. And then thirdly, for the KOLs, I mean, it's absolutely fabulous. Not only are they becoming extremely wealthy, but they're aggregating more audiences to themselves, and they have the potential. Some of these big influencers have talked about launching their own brands, and it's really, really fabulous. And again, it's one of these situations where I feel like the brands are just don't see, or don't always see, that they're really getting, in some ways it feels like they're getting taken advantage of, and they don't have a choice, because where else are they going to go to get 10 million eyeballs and to sell 20,000 units in 5 minutes? It's just not possible anywhere else. And unless they have extremely unique value propositions or retention marketing strategies, this is going to be not a great result for them in the long term. But it is genius, and it is a great model, and it's great for 3 out of 4. So,
So
I'm
it's
sure
probably going to stay, right? It's probably going to stay in the market.
Yes, it will probably continue.
Oh no, that's incredible. What do you see bloggers doing during this COVID-19 and post-COVID-19? Because many of them, including Austin Lee, for the first time ever since they really became popular, if we talk about big guys like Via and Austin Lee, etc., they actually went silent or almost silent for a couple of days and even weeks. And then they tried to sell something or talk about some topics. But, these initial lives were not really so popular and successful. So there's been a bit of a change there. What do you see on the ground? How big is that shift and change? Is it all back to normal? Are these live streamers, again, changing something long-term?
Yeah, no, I think, one of the things that happened is everybody was, one, scared. Two, they weren't producing maybe content because they weren't in their regular content production modes or had the support that they needed. And they also didn't want to seem predatory or like they were taking advantage of people's fear or time of need or something like that. On top of that, all brands essentially canceled or suspended campaigns. There was very, very few. Maggie had one YSL commercial that somehow snuck out after Chinese New Year and before Valentine's, and then the next week we had a Mac commercial that got pushed back to May. And essentially at Park Lou, we saw all customers suspend campaigns and any activity there. And a lot of that was just based around, reduced consumption and delivery services, the logistics part of it. And then also, I think that there was a respect for the fact that, hey, this is just not the time to be selling. That being said, it didn't take too long, but maybe another couple content again, because there was wonderful engagement online. I mean, the number of people who were engaged with platforms and downloading new platforms, and Weibo, registered significant usage, but advertising was way down for them. And that had to do with the fact that advertisers were pulling out and not spending money there. That being said, and this is one of those areas that I'm very critical of brands, and I can totally see why KOLs are successful. It's because during these times, KOLs were providing value to their audiences and creating content and knew that people were bored and doing live streams and doing something special, and beauty bloggers doing their favorite cooking stuff, and they're just that really value.
They were human
first.
Right? They were human.
Yeah, they were very, very human and very value first, and very understood too that this was a time to aggregate audiences and engage with people. And brands typically have gotten themselves in the mode where they only interact with people when they have something to sell. And and that's and that's, nobody would hang out with anyone that every time they hung out with them they wanted to sell them something. And so I saw some of that behavior. We did see some really cool things though. There were brands who Nike, another one for Nike, reached out to some of their top KOLs that they product seed with and things like that. And they just offered them free workout classes. So you had special access to kind of a gated live stream with a professional coach so you could work out. We did see just some of that more private content and community building stuff from some smarter brands and brands that were sensitive to that moment, which was really good. But we're kind of getting back to campaigns are already launching again, and things are getting back to normal for sure. And we'll see that increasingly so over April and into May. I would suspect things will be kind of full steam ahead, leading into the whatever JD's thing is in June.
No, that's really cool. Right now, over this whole COVID-19 situation, a lot of people think that because Western brands, many at least, sort of withdrew, as you said, their campaigns, their communication, they did not remain very human for a couple of weeks at least. But mainland Chinese brands, many of them, jumped on this opportunity and provided, again, value. They also supported the community. They did subsidies, etc. So a lot of things that we see, at least here, third, fourth, and fifth tier cities somehow start looking more preferably on Chinese local brands. Do you think this COVID-19 actually accelerated this China first and China brands kind of love affair with the consumer, or you don't see much impact?
I have been saying since 2019 that the next decade is going to be the decade of Chinese brands.
Yeah.
I think they are going to be super dominant, and I think they're not just going to be dominant in China. I think that they have a chance globally. And I think it's not just going to be, some of the tech verticals. I think it's going to be in beauty, and it's going to be in fashion, and it's going to be in some areas that people didn't suspect that a Chinese brand could dominate. And it's because they look at product development and community and retention and areas of focus that other brands have just, they're totally blind to it at the moment. And I really, really see, it's especially apparent in China that we've gotten to the point where CAC, the customer acquisition costs, are in some cases outpacing LTV, the lifetime value of customers. And this is posing really significant challenges to brands. And Chinese companies are looking at innovation, knowing that there's not much that you can do to improve CAC in many ways, because the cost of bloggers, the cost of traffic is always
Just so
going up.
expensive, yeah.
It's so expensive. I think it was Tmall or Taobao has tripled their prices in advertising over the last 4 years. And so that's not the way to challenge it. The challenge is, what can you do around product innovation and what can you do around retention? So what can we do to increase that LTV? And that's what we really, I can see that these Chinese brands are just geniuses at. And I think they're just playing on a different level. They're playing a different ball game. And I think that it's one that's more adapt for the e-commerce social selling environment that we're in and increasingly speeding towards. So yeah, I think that absolutely this might be another one of those markers where we see this shift from west to east. And it really does play really, really well into to the strengths that these Chinese brands have.
And do Western brands actually have a chance in this market? Right now, a lot of them, I feel, are quite scared, right? Because the whole global environment is not so positive, so they might be losing money everywhere else in their home countries, in their headquarters. And China might be, as we discussed earlier, one of the few markets of growth or potential growth. And it is an expensive market, and there are local competitors and there are foreign competitors. So is there still a chance? And if so, what shall brands do in order to capture this opportunity? What is the mindset? What are some actionable steps that they need to take in order to even have a chance for success?
Yeah, I think that a lot of it's going to be about brand. I think that they're going to have to focus on that, communicating that brand value proposition in a really local way. That's really what the local competitors have an advantage over, is they communicate in a really high context, local guanxi kind of dynamics, and it really works. And so these brands, like, there's this concept out there of that these shiny new toys, and that you can buy significant amounts of traffic, but I don't think a lot of brands are looking at what's the cost, and is this strategy going to really produce the results that you ultimately want? And I see, I think the Western brands have gotten so used to this idea of, or advertising and communicating with customers in a very TV advertising, Facebook, Google kind of way, where you put in a ad resource or a communication into some big cogged machine, and as long as you put money into it and you click the button, customers and revenue and sales come out the other side. Where in China, it's actually much, much more granular. You have to be so close to the customers, and you have to look at things like community building, and you have to look at things like the importance of each individual customer, and the importance of their word of mouth to other customers, and what does that mean for creating culture around the brand. And there are some brands that are fabulously genius at this. And again,
what are your favorite brands? Tell us.
I think Nike is going to be a brand that's very, very hard to compete with for a Chinese brand, because Nike is doing a lot of the things that a local brand could do, and on the ground, super granular stuff. And so they're really genius at that. Where we really see a lot of the risk is actually in more like fashion and beauty, where the international fashion and beauty brands are not doing what the local brands are doing. And that's why we've seen, Perfect Diary launch in, essentially 2016 and become the #1 selling brand in China in 2018. And I think that we'll see these types of really dramatic shifts, because they're willing to treat customers differently. And until foreign brands are willing to do that, then it's going to be a challenging market. And China is a super challenging market, no doubt about it. And it's going to remain a challenging market. But the risk and reward, there's a lot of reward for doing well in China. And especially when it's potentially one of the places of growth, short-term and long-term. If you win here, the reward could be very, very significant.
Everybody's excited about it right now, I'm sure. And I've also heard still a couple of international, let's say, brands feel that they have this inherited advantage in China just because they are luxury, just because they are in mother and baby, let's say, segment, just because they are in this health and wellness. And right now, everybody's obviously concerned about health and wellness. And these are indeed the industries where still up until this point, maybe Western international brands have a bit more appeal. But for how much longer will they just have that appeal because they're made in Australia or made in the US?
And it's just going to depend. I mean, there's never probably going to be a Chinese milk farm that competes with an Aussie or New Zealand milk farm. I mean, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
But in those areas where you don't have that type of moat, then there is significant risk, no doubt. And then you even see, and I think that's probably something that comes up where a Chinese company maybe even is able to acquire or build a brand in one of those places. And then they because so much of this stuff honestly is commoditized in that the product differentiation and price and stuff like that isn't that much different. It really comes down to brand.
Yeah, absolutely. Elijah, thank you so much. It was super insightful. Guys, do connect with Elijah on LinkedIn and do read his blog post on parklo.com, where they have a phenomenal blog as well. If you would like to work with them, Elijah is a manager and the co-founder of Maggie's personal brand. She's a big blogger, as I mentioned, in cosmetics and fashion industry. So do connect with him to learn more about Maggie and his other projects as well. Thank you so much for being with us again, and stay tuned for more.
Thanks, Ashley.